Right, I think we're good on the academic order. What do you think, Christina?
Sure, let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. Well, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. I am going to introduce Mask Together America. My name is Angelique Corthals. I am at the City University of New York. I'm a professor of many things, but my main focus is pathology and public health. I was also working with Doctors Without Borders on diagnostic technology, and I've done various other things that we can tell you a little bit later. First, I just want to introduce Mask Together America. So Mask Together America is an advocacy. It's not yet an advocacy non-for-profit. It's actually an advocacy group right now, which was created in 2020 by our great founder, Julie Lam, that you see over there. She started by literally just taking picture of people in the street wearing masks during the height of the start of the pandemic. And then this turned into more and more about the importance of mitigation that are not pharmaceutical. So that would be masks, clean air, etc. Then advocacy of the vaccine when the vaccines came along, and really advocacy of what we now call the layered mitigations, which is that Swiss cheese that you schematic that you may have seen. So basically, no one layer is perfect in and of itself. The multiple layer is what really ends up protecting us the best against not just COVID, but all airborne diseases. And we know now we're seeing a big surge of airborne diseases, so it's particularly important to be mindful of those layered mitigation. We have pretty important presence on social media. So we have our platform, our Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and X, and Blue Sky now, right? And Blue Sky. So find us on Blue Sky as well. We use our platform to promote the layered approach in mitigation. We share through the work of our founder, Julie Lam, true stories and annotations of published articles. We also try to decant the information from medical journals because they can be very tough to read, and the importance of them can be easily missed in jargon. We are really an advocacy community that is powered by grassroots support, and the social media campaign has been growing from strength to strength. I think now, if I'm not mistaken, we're well beyond 10,000 followers on Instagram, if I remember the latest count. So we really are now reaching every corner of the United States, but also corners of the world. We don't have Mastodon. No, we don't have Mastodon. So, sorry, that was a question in the chat. Not only are we advocating layered mitigation, but we are also advocating protection and treatment for long COVID. About 75% of the US adults are at high risk of severe COVID because of medical condition, disabilities, racial discrimination, social disparities, and so on and so forth, even more now. It's already very clear that COVID-19 has killed millions, and the numbers that you see out there are actually vastly undercounted, but the actual public health emergency that is rising very quickly to a peak is the long COVID emergency, and I think that has not been appreciated very well by governments around the world. And part of our mission is to make sure that we keep telling not just the public, but administrations about long COVID, about the danger it represents, about the suffering it represents to a major part of the population. So obviously we can't do everything, and part of the reason for having this group is to have a community, and a community is all that we need for in times like the times that we are living in right now. It's important to know that you're not alone. It's important to know that we're in this together, and it's important to know that there is a place for you to go. I think that on our website we have a quote from Dr. King, who said, "If I can't do great things, I can do small things in a great way." Every little thing matters. Every collective actions that we are taking together is enough, and it is important, no matter how small you may think it is. So we have to believe that a better world is possible. We have to be brave, and we have to be hopeful, because the forces that are at play right now thrive in darkness and despair, and we can't let them win. And with that, I will leave the talk to Christina.
Thank you to our scientific advisor for such a wonderful introduction. I am Christina Oriana. I am Mask Together America's Clean Air Ambassador, and I will be your MC for this webinar. At Mask Together America, we strive to do one thing well, which is educate our followers through evidence-based medicine and science, truth and facts, not ideology, subjects that have stood the test of time. We aim to keep our followers safe and healthy, and we are so grateful for your support. Thank you for joining us. So I would like to begin with Dr. Richard Corsi. Dr. Richard Corsi is Dean of the College of Engineering at UC Davis. He spent most of his career at UT Austin, where he researched and taught about indoor pollutant sources, chemistry, and innovative control technologies. Dr. Corsi was an endowed research chair and member of the Academy of Distinguished Teachers, and was director of an interdisciplinary program on indoor environmental science and engineering that spawned many successful scholars in indoor air science. In the year of 2023-24, Dr. Corsi chaired a National Academies Committee report on health risks of indoor exposure to fine particulate matter and practical mitigation solutions. He was a distinguished alumnus by Cal Poly Humboldt and distinguished engineering alumnus by UC Davis. Dr. Corsi's work has been featured in The Economist, The New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, Forbes, National Geographic, Business Week, and more. Thank you so much for joining us today. So to begin, we have our first question. I am up to date with my COVID vaccine and flu shot. So am I all set? Do I still need to mask or clean the air?
So thank you, Christina, for the nice introduction. Before I answer that question, and I want to say thank you to all of you for inviting me to be here. It's a privilege to be here. And to add something to what Dr. Corthals said, and I wasn't prepared to say this today, but I'll say it since you mentioned long COVID. I've had COVID once. It affected me for 5 months. I had intermittent blindness in my right eye. I could not drive on the freeway by myself because I would just go blind like that. And 2 or 3 minutes later, when my eyesight came back, I would get really dizzy. So it affected me. Tons of doctor's visits. They couldn't figure out anything. But there's some great research going on now on the impacts of SARS-CoV-2 virus on the retina. So finally, some good research is coming out in that area. So it can affect you in all sorts of ways. Thanks again. So the question was, you've been vaccinated. Do you still need to wear a mask? I think that was the question, right? So
they wanted to know if they're all set based on receiving a COVID vaccine and a flu shot. So do they still need to mask or clean the air?
So the short answer is yes. So we know that vaccinations tend to lower the probability of severe outcomes, but you can be fully vaccinated and you can get COVID repeatedly afterwards. So it doesn't completely protect you at all from from being infected, and that's unfortunate. I've been saying since the start of the pandemic that the dose makes the probability of infection. We know that's true for all sorts of other coronaviruses and even the influenza virus. So we want to lower our dose of viruses that we inhale to be able to not become infected, or to lower our probability of being infected. To significantly lower our dose of virus-laden respiratory aerosol particles, we need to wear a mask in indoor public spaces. That is probably the one thing you can do that dramatically lowers your dose if you wear at least a KN95, better yet an N95 respirator. When we have controlled increased ventilation, assuming the outdoor air quality is not horrible and during wildfires, but increased ventilation if we have control of ventilation in our buildings, and then use effective filtration, whether it's filtration in HVAC systems or portable air cleaners. I do want to say, and this is really important, layered risk reduction is really important. If somebody said you can only use one, right, the one that's going to give you your greatest reduction in inhaled dose of virus-laden particles is going to be wearing a good, well-fitting N95 or even a KN95 mask. And then try to meet outdoors when you have to have meetings. I'm fortunate that I live in a place where we can have lots of meetings outdoors. So my team has lots of meetings outdoors on picnic benches. My wife and I still go out to dinner. We always eat outdoors. So I guess the short answer to your question is yes, and for those reasons.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Second question. Even vaccinated people get infected. So what's your recommendation on masking?
I think I just answered that,
Yeah,
but maybe
I'll just answer that one. Yeah. So
okay.
Moving on. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you for that. So I use a CO2 monitor to check the air. The number is below 800 parts per million. Does that mean people can gather maskless in a crowded space like a concert, conference, or shopping mall?
It doesn't mean that you can be safe if you gather maskless in a crowded space. So it's important to remember that exposure to viruses, again, the viruses are in respiratory aerosol particles that come out of an infector's respiratory system, little tiny particles, aerosols that are made up of mucus and saliva. Viruses are inside them. And we're exposed in two ways. One is in what I call the far field. You're in a room, somebody's 40 feet away and they're infected. Their aerosols stay suspended, they accumulate over time, and you can be exposed even if you're not in the close vicinity of them. It's what I call far field or background transmission, right? And then the other situations when you're sitting next to somebody who's infected, or sitting across the table from somebody who's infected, or talking to somebody who's infected, that's the near field. So CO2 values, 800 ppm or less, for example, that really relates to the far field, right? It really isn't giving you any indication of how safe it is being right next to or talking to somebody close to you who's infected. I did a lot of modeling at the beginning of the pandemic. I felt 800 ppm was too high even for the far field. My modeling suggested that if we wanted to get down to sort of the lowest 10th percentile in terms of infection probability, we needed to be below 680 ppm. For COVID, it can be higher for influenza, which is a little less transmissible. So I guess the answer to the question is yes, you should still mask because you don't know who around you is infected, and that CO2 measurement means almost nothing if you're standing right next to somebody or talking to somebody who's infected. The CO2 value relates to sort of the background, the far field buildup of respiratory particles that contain viruses. There was did you say something about concerts? Is that, I can't remember.
It was concerts were included as places to potentially gather.
So I think same answer there. If you're, in the middle of a bunch of crowded people at a concert I would wear a mask, right? The background concentrations in the air in a football stadium that's enclosed, or a big basketball stadium or something, CO2 concentrations may be much less than 800 ppm. Generally, you have a large volume to mix things into. Those types of buildings tend to be pretty well ventilated. And so you might take a measurement in the middle of a facility like that, and it's less than 800 ppm. But if you're right next to or a few feet away from somebody who's infected, having a low far field CO2 concentration isn't going to protect you.
Okay. So CDC's viral activity reports on the website don't seem to reach Americans, as people aren't masking or getting vaccinated, even though many viruses are making people sick year-round. So how could the CDC better warn the general public?
Such a complicated question. So I was I was afraid there's going to be a CDC question. So I'll do my best here with CDC. Let me start by saying, in its first incarnation, the CDC has been with us for about 80 years or so, 79 years, I think, from 1946, and has been critical for eradicating diseases in our own country and around the world. They've done so much good. But unfortunately, I'll be blunt, they've lost credibility in the last 5 years. All right, they've lost the trust of a lot of people. I don't need to go into all the reasons why, but I think most people that are listening probably understand. It's really difficult for them to be conveyors of information for that reason. I think that much of the public has lost trust in them. I think that's sad. I want that to change. I think the CDC is incredibly important, and we need to get back to a place where people trust them again. I don't think that many Americans go to the CDC website for information. I'd be shocked if it was more than 1%. So I'm not sure what they post on their website is that important. I think it's important that CDC get information out to effectively get information out to state public health agencies, local health agencies, those that are in close proximity to people where there are outbreaks, and that's probably their primary role, or that should be an important role for them. I'll say that Americans have a very short attention span. There's so much going on in our lives. It's hard for us to absorb lots of information. I think it's only 5 or 6% of Americans have a STEM degree, a bachelor's degree or higher. So we're talking about a country where 95 or 96% of Americans don't have a lot of science education. And so when CDC communicates, or whoever communicates to the public, it needs to be simple, consistent, repeated over and over again, and to the extent possible, visual in nature. And I think we learned that during the pandemic, or we should have learned that to be true. People respond to sources they think are trusted sources, and unfortunately in our country right now, that means largely friends and things we see on social media. And so as we convey information, we also have to remember that we have to convey that information on lots of different platforms, which your organization is doing such a great job of, as you said in the introduction. So CDC, I think, has a lot of room for improvement with respect to communication to the public, and needs to regain the trust of the American people. And I hope that happens. I don't know if that answers the question, but I'm saying that as diplomatically as I can.
Your message is loud and clear and right on. So our next question, the CDC's map for COVID has changed from red tones to green bluish tones and then muted. Are these changes to the color key helpful in warning the public?
So short answer, no, but I'm not an expert on the psychology of colors. So I want to full disclosure there. I've never done research on the psychology of colors, but my sense is, and I think probably everybody on the Zoom call would understand, that red is generally associated with so many things as meaning warning or danger, right? It's a color that says warning or danger. Blue and green are nice. It's nature. It's Bambi. It's a good feeling. These are good feeling colors. So I think that change is really unfortunate. Muted is also very unfortunate. It's hard for me to believe that that's not intentional because it makes so much common sense. If it is intentional, I think it's an example of grossly inappropriate social engineering. And again, I think it just eats away at public trust, which is really unfortunate.
So you chaired the National Academy's Consensus Report Committee on the health effects of indoor fine particulate matter and practical mitigation strategies. Can you tell us about some of the important outcomes for that study?
Thank you for asking that. And I just happen to have a copy next to me, so I'll hold it up. This is what the report looks like. I was the chair of the committee, but I had 10 other committee members who are extraordinary international experts on everything from the health effects of fine particulate matter to control technologies, et cetera. It's a consensus report Took us about 18 months to write, and it's, I think, 237 pages long. So there's a lot of details in this report. If you can download it for free by Googling or search engineering National Academies Health Indoor PM 2.5, you'll find the site and you can download it a PDF for free. All right, that having been said, I think it's a wonderful product. It really provides a state of knowledge assessment on everything we know about the health effects and control of fine particulate matter indoors. We reached several broad conclusions, and so I'm gonna sort of paraphrase what they are right now. Number one is there is absolutely ample evidence that exposure to indoor fine particulate matter causes adverse health effects. Okay, we explain why in detail in the report. I won't spend a lot of time doing that here, but we have a really thick chapter 6, on the health effects and what we know from both particles of outdoor origin that come indoors, as well as particles that are generated by indoor sources. So that's number one. There's ample evidence now, no question. This international committee says indoor fine particulate matter and exposure to that causes health effects across our population. The second is disparities exist in population exposure to indoor fine particulate matter of both outdoor and indoor origin. That was a thread throughout the report, whether it's the sources or our exposure or the health effects or our ability to reduce our exposure. There are tremendous economic disadvantages for large parts of our population. A large part of our population that is economically disadvantaged lives near heavy industry, lives near highways, lives near significant outdoor sources of harmful particulate matter. A significant part of our population lives in housing that's multifamily housing, that's older, that's sometimes multi-generational, where we have, multiple generations living in small volume homes where COVID and flu and colds can spread very rapidly. Or if somebody's cooking, lots of people are exposed to bad stuff from cooking events. During wildfires, a lot of communities that are economic disadvantaged have very leaky places they live, and so they're exposed to higher amounts of wildfires, and they simply don't have the resources to go out and buy a nice HEPA air cleaner or to even buy masks, right? That's a lot of Americans who live paycheck by paycheck. So we're suggesting in our report that these communities be the initial focus of any efforts by the government to help Americans. The third is that technological advances have really great potential for quantifying and reducing exposures to fine particulate matter. Again, not getting into the details, we talk about sensor technologies, how less expensive they've come over time, how much more accurate they've come over time, and how we can use those to communicate to people inside of buildings about things that they can do to reduce their exposure in the moment, right? You're cooking, you're being exposed to a lot of stuff while you're cooking, turn on your exhaust fan on your stove. Or that the sensors could be built into the exhaust fans on the stoves, so the exhaust fans automatically turn on when you're cooking, right? The fourth one is effective and this is really important, effective and practical mitigation of exposure to fine particulate matter in homes and in schools is currently possible. We don't need a lot more research on that topic. We have the technologies now. We can dramatically reduce population exposure to fine particulate matter indoors, and that should dramatically reduce the health effects that we also concluded are happening indoors. So that can be done now. Maybe a little bit of research around the edges. How can we make something quieter, et cetera? But we can do it now, right? Not a whole lot of new research needed there. And the last one, which is maybe the one we struggled the most over, but we came to consensus on this, is that there's an absolute lack of centralized responsibility in our country for indoor fine particulate matter policy, and that lack of centralized responsibility is hindering reductions in population exposure to scale. We make a big point that technology is not an issue. We have the resources now to dramatically reduce people's exposure to indoor fine particulate matter. What's happening is that at our federal government level, there's just no centralized authority, and that needs to change. That all the different agencies from US EPA to DOE to CDC and so on and so forth need to come together and be on the same page and move forward with a plan in place to reduce people's exposure. So we provide a lot of details on all of these things in the report, and I hope you look at those details.
Thank you. Yes, I couldn't agree more. So our next question, when concerned about infection risk indoors, how effective for ventilation is it to just open a window an inch or two?
An inch or two. Okay, so I would say inconsistently effective. It sometimes it's very effective and sometimes it's very ineffective. It really depends upon the environmental conditions, especially outdoors, how windy it is, how the building is oriented to the wind, where the window is relative to the wind. You can open a window on a bedroom and see as low of an air exchange rate increase of 0.3 air changes per hour. So a little bit of an increase, but not huge. Under other conditions, it might be 7 per hour. Depends, again, orientation of the wind, orientation of the window, orientation of the building, et cetera. I had some students at the university that did some studies on their dorm rooms, and they opened the windows in their dorm rooms, the whole window, not an inch or two, right? And they were seeing kind of about an increase of about 2 air changes per hour increase when they opened the window on their dorms rooms. In contrast, if they use a Corsi Rosenthal box, one of these DIY air cleaners, right, they can achieve about 24 air change per hour equivalent. Essentially, the dorm room becomes like the outdoor environment in terms of exposure to COVID. So opening windows is not the magic elixir, right? It has to be the right conditions to get high increases in ventilation. It's really dependent on things like the pressure gradients between indoors and outdoors and how much wind there is, and somewhat on buoyancy effects driven by temperature and relative humidity differences between indoors and outdoors, without getting into all the details of the mathematics of how that happens.
Great. Well, in keeping with the themes, our next question is, can CR boxes remove viruses from the air? And if so, how does it work?
So the answer is yes, and a lot. A lot. It can remove a lot. How they work. So the original CR box was designed with 4 MERV 13 filters forming a box, the shell of a box. So the walls of the air cleaner are the filters themselves, right? 4 or 5 filters. And then you seal the edges between the filters. You put a box fan on top of the filters. We usually use 20-inch by 20-inch filters and 20-inch by 20-inch box fan. That was the original one. And you seal it all up and turn on the box fan, and you've got tremendous airflow to the unit and removal of respiratory aerosols or wildfire smoke to the filters in the unit. It works really well because when you put these pleated MERV 13 filters in parallel, you're putting a large surface area in parallel. You're drawing air through a very large surface area. So at any point on those filters, the incident airspeed is actually quite low, even though the total airflow is huge through the fan, right? With a very low airspeed through the individual filters, you get a tiny pressure drop. When you get a tiny pressure drop, you've got very little resistance on the fan motor. And so the airflow stays very, very, very high, just almost like you just have a box fan with nothing attached to it, right? Put really little resistance on it. So the combination, I think, of efficient filters, MERV 13 filters are really efficient at removing particles in the size range of respiratory aerosols that contain viruses, and having this huge airflow rate. We get a system that's literally more effective than $500, $600, $300 HEPA air cleaners you can purchase in the store, and you can build one of these things for about $65. So a fraction of the cost, and you get more effective air cleaning in the space. It does take, the first time you build one, about an hour to build one. As you build more over time, it takes less and less. I can build one now in about 25 minutes.
That's great. So we have another question regarding CR boxes. So it says the original CR box, and you already spoke partially to this about the design. It's 4 to 5 filters and it's a box fan. This question specifically asks, to build a big supply fast for LA, a new modified box has 1 filter taped to a box fan. And is this new version strong enough to filter the wildfire smoke in LA?
That's a great question. And so I should probably just briefly discuss how the foundation came to just using one filter, right? So the foundation is young. We have a certain amount of money, but we don't have abundant amounts of money. We had a really great donation from 3M. They provided us $80,000 to $100,000 worth of filters about 6 months ago. Good MERV 13 filters, and so we can use those. So we had to make a decision when the wildfire started. The foundation got together. We have a board of directors of about 7 people. We're all volunteers. We get together once a month, usually to make decisions on grant applications. But then the wildfires hit, and we had an emergency meeting. We said, can we do something to help? Had this discussion about what we could do. And we had this, this question of, do we provide Corsi Rosenthal boxes, the full box, to 4 times less people, or a single filter on a box fan to 4 times as many people, right? Do we reach more people with something that's less effective, but still effective in something like a bedroom, right? A single filter on a box fan can do a great job in something like a 200 square foot bedroom, right? That was really our dilemma. And we came around to saying, this is happening so fast, let's try to help as many people as possible. So we decided to go with a single filter on the box fan. They are not, that design is not as effective. There's a much greater resistance to airflow. So you get lower airflow through the filter. The clean air delivery rate, or sort of the effectiveness of the device, isn't as good, but it's still fine for something like a bedroom at night in a child's bedroom that has asthma during the wildfires. And that was a decision we made. I think that if we were a bigger foundation, we might have said, let's provide, full boxes to almost 1,200 people we provided air cleaners to during the wildfires. 1,200 in senior centers and displaced people shelters and homeless shelters. And so they went to places where there are lots of people. So that's really the story of why we did it. And it was really we had a discussion about what we should do. We decided, let's help more people a little less than helping less people a lot.
Excellent. Excellent. So can CR boxes help filter toxic gases?
So it depends on the toxic gas. So they can effectively remove what we call semi-volatile organic compounds. These are chemicals associated with plasticizers and flame retardants and PFAs and pesticides, things that tend to be endocrine disrupting chemicals or potentially very toxic. Brown University did some studies with CR boxes, and they found them to be effective at removing on the order of 60% of semi-volatile organic compounds from air. A lot of those are probably associated with the particle phase already, because those compounds in the air, they exist in the gas phase and the particle phase. And so when you're removing the particles, you're removing those bad things from air with those particles. They're pretty sticky chemicals, so some of the gas phase is probably sticking to the filter fibers as well. And that's pretty good removal of pretty toxic stuff from the air. The CR boxes are not, as currently designed, effective at removing volatile organic compounds from air. I have a lot of ideas on how to retrofit them to make them very effective at removing VOCs. My head's been spinning with those ideas, and I just have not had time to get in the laboratory. And my ideas involve putting an insert inside the box itself as opposed to modifying the filters. I just haven't had time to do it. So I'll say maybe that's a teaser for a future paper a year from now.
That's great. That would be amazing. So our next question, can CR boxes filter particulate matter, such as particulate matter with a diameter of 2.5 or 10 micrometers or less?
Yeah, definitely for both. So 10 micron particles are pretty big particles in the air pollution world. Tends to be pollen and mold spores, that kind of thing. MERV 13 filters are incredibly, almost 100% of any of those kinds of particles that go through them are going to be removed. And again, we have a very high volume of flow going through them. So we'll remove a lot of that stuff from air. And PM 2.5 also. We've done tests at UC Davis. I think there's 12 other studies that have been done that show highly effective for PM 2.5. within the PM 2.5 range, particles less than 2.5 microns. And just for the viewers as some context, the average human hair has a cross-section of about 50 to 100 microns, depending on whether you have fine or coarse hair. So we're talking about particles that are much smaller than the cross-section, that have diameters much smaller than the cross-section of a human hair diameter. So for particles that are ultrafine particles, like really tiny particles, 0.1 microns and below, a 1,000th the diameter of the cross-section of human hair, we can even see really good removal in CR boxes for these incredibly tiny particles. Without getting into all the details, those ultrafine particles, as they're moving through air, tend to fluctuate a lot as they're being bombarded by molecules all around them. And so we get this thing called Brownian motion, and that can very effectively remove those particles in filters. And tests that I've done in my laboratory show that we're getting 60 to 70% removal of ultrafine particles as well in CR boxes.
Fantastic.
So the answer is yes, I guess.
Fantastic. So where can people learn to assemble the new single filter CR box devices? Great
question. So there's probably a lot of websites. The one that I've seen recently that I really liked was British Columbia Lung Foundation. So BC Lung Foundation. If you just type BC Lung Foundation DIY air cleaner, I think you'll go to the site, and they have a really nice description of the single filter on box fan units.
Great. So for a CR box, how long before it needs to be rebuilt with new filters?
Great question. So we just published a study we did at UC Davis where we took 4 CR boxes and we put them in 4 locations on campus that range from incredibly filthy to very clean office suites. The filthy one was actually in a soils laboratory where there's soil suspended in the air and cement that's mixed in the room and rocks that are crushed in the room. The filter got pretty caked with stuff on it. And then the office suite that I'm in was the clean one. So we had this wide range of environments. Our research suggested that they still function very well after 2,600 hours, 2,600 hours of actual on time, so operating time. We operated them 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we tested them about every few months or so. Brought them back to the laboratory, tested them for their clean air delivery rates, tested them for pressure drop through the filters, tested them for a bunch of, we even tested them for the removal efficiency through the filters, as well as the flow rate. We got some reduction in performance over those hours, maybe a 30% reduction on average in overall performance. We started with clean air delivery rates that far exceeded commercial HEPA air cleaners for all particle sizes. After that amount of time, we were still exceeding HEPA air cleaners for everything but the smallest particle sizes, but still getting really good removal for those small particle sizes. So as some context, 2,600 hours of actual on time is roughly almost 2 complete K through 12 academic years. So if you have something like this in a classroom and you're using it 8 hours a day in the classroom, 5 days a week for 8 months a year, subtracting out holidays and summer, you can get about two years of use on one of these. One of the great things about these is even when they look dirty, people think they have to change the filters because that's what people think about for the filters in their HVAC systems. Because these are parallel filters of MERV 13, because the airspeed going through them is so low, much lower than you have in an HVAC system, you never build up much of a resistance on the fan motor. The pressure drop stays really, really small, even when the filters look filthy and they're really gray, or in the case of our soils lab, thick brown cake on them, we were still getting really good performance. And so that's another one of the benefits of these CR boxes is that low incident airspeed, the low pressure drop allows you to continue to use them even when they look like the filters need to be replaced. So I'm suggesting to everybody now, think about how often each day you use it. Remember that you can use it. Our test went out to 2,600 hours and they were still working well. My guess is we could have gone to 3,500 hours. For a lot of people in their homes, or as I say in schools, that can be a couple of years, even when the filter doesn't look that great. I mean, it's really pretty extraordinary that they can function so well.
Yes. So what is a good source of information for outdoor air quality for communities near or downwind from urban wildfires?
So there's going to be different information sources depending on where you are. I live in the Sacramento region. We get a lot of information in the Sacramento region locally about air quality. I think nationally, a good source is airnow.gov. So www.airnow.gov usually has information about wildfires across the country and measurements of pollution in those areas. So it's no matter where you live around the country, you can get information from airnow.gov. That's a sort of a joint venture between the US EPA and the US Forest Service. Hopefully that will still exist in the future, but that is a source of information. Otherwise, I think local public health agencies. I live in a county that has a really good local public health agency, and they really provide a lot of information to people who live in our small rural county in California.
Right. So CR boxes are equipped with box fans, and they usually have 3 fan speeds. What speed do you recommend?
The highest speed is the best, especially for the 4-filter CR box. That'll give you the highest, what we call clean air delivery rate, the highest effective air changes per hour, equivalent air changes per hour. For the 5-filter box, what we found is really interesting. For a 5-filter box, the $20 box fan, we can achieve clean air delivery rates on the high speed of over 800 cubic feet per minute. That's in contrast to really good HEPA air cleaners, which can provide about 300. And the reason they can't provide more is the airflow rate through them is just so much less than a box fan, right? So we can get to 800 with a 5-filter box fan. It turns out on high speed, it turns out on medium speed, you still get pretty, 750 CFM, right? So it's not that much less than the highest speed with a 5-filter box, and it is quieter, right? And it does use less energy. And then for a 5-filter box on low speed, we're still achieving around 600 CFM, which is about twice what you can get with a good commercial HEPA air cleaner. And it's very quiet. And if you compare it to a HEPA air, and when I say on low speed for the CR box, it's twice as good as a HEPA air cleaner on the highest speed, and the CR box has a lower decibel reading. So yeah. So if you're in a small bedroom, you don't have to keep it on high. Low speed is going to clean a lot of the air. If you're in a large living room, you probably want to keep it on high. In a classroom, I would keep it on high or medium, depending on if it's a 4 or 5 filter box.
So in keeping with that theme, where should CR boxes be positioned in a room to be most effective?
So theoretically, probably centrally located, but that's not possible and not feasible a lot of times, especially in something like a classroom. Certainly feasible, I think, in people's homes. But I would answer that also by saying any place is better than no place, right? So don't worry too much. Don't stress too much about the location. Try to keep it away. Try to keep the surfaces away, the filters away from furniture or corners where walls come together. You don't want to block off the flow and make it more difficult to get air into it. But yeah, I think the other thing is keep the orientation with the fan blowing air upwards. That creates really good mixing in a space, vertical mixing in a space, and that helps to dilute pollutants are in that space, which lowers the levels in your breathing zone. So that's important. We have research going on right now at UC Davis. One of my students is working on a project that's associated with that near field issue. And what we're exploring is a CR box in a room that's oriented upwards and causes these big upward downward movements. Is it effective of breaking up the respiratory plume between you and somebody who's infected? And our initial results are, yeah, right? We're exploring right now lots of different orientations. If an infector is here and I'm there and the box is over there, 10 feet away, does it do it? How close does the box have to be? But the results look really promising that in addition to removing particles from the air, in a space very effectively, the CR box can also break up that concentrated respiratory plume if you're in near vicinity of an infected person. So upward is good vertical mixing, break up that respiratory plume. Don't stress too much about exactly where it is in the room. Just keep it away from surfaces.
Now, are CR boxes helpful an HVAC system has already been updated? What is the need or value of using a CR box along with an updated HVAC system?
Part of that depends on what updating the HVAC system means. If it means updating it so that you can use a MERV 13 filter, and if it's possible to use it, on continuous fan all the time, that's going to give you pretty good removal in a space. I would say layered risk reduction is very important. That was brought up at the beginning by Dr. Corthals. So having a CR box is going to add additional, it's going to lower the dose even more. And so it's good to layer that on top of it. Also, as I just mentioned, the CR box is going to add a lot more mixing to the space than just the HVAC system. So you can break up those respiratory plumes between you and a near source infector. So I think it makes sense to use both.
Okay, so the Corsi Rosenthal Foundation has done amazing work helping to get cleaner air into our children's schools. How many schools have you partnered with to date to build CR boxes for their classrooms?
I have this written down in front of me, so I've been doing some other work on this, so I'll look down on my notes. We've really ramped up in the past year. We're about 18 months old or so. So far we've worked with 15 schools. In most of those schools, we've given them enough boxes to retrofit all the classrooms in the school. So some of them are 48 classrooms, 30 classrooms, et cetera. Probably affecting so far, I would say, in schools about 5,000 students we've worked with. We're really focusing on schools in underserved areas. We've worked with Southland College Prep in Chicago. We've worked with a rural school district in Kentucky. We've working with the LA Unified School District and Round Rock schools in Arizona. Generally, underserved communities don't have a lot of resources to put towards improving the health of their schools. We just got a funding that'll allow us to retrofit probably all classrooms in an entire school district in Southeast Texas, in a very industrialized area. So that's it's probably about $100,000 project. So that'll be our biggest project to date. That'll affect a lot more students, obviously. So our goal is to just keep adding to the numbers that we've helped. We've also given 15 grants to community organizations, including those that work with farm workers in the Imperial Valley of California, Del Valley. There's a Del Valley Association. I think that's in Texas, but I might be wrong. It works with homes with children with severe asthma. And in addition to all that, as I said, we've given the sort of single filter air cleaners to about 1,200. We've distributed about 1,200 of those in Los Angeles. And I know your next speaker is going to talk in detail about that effort. She's been just a hero when it comes to that effort. So Liesl's just amazing. So that's kind of a summary of our portfolio so far. And we continue to grow. We continue to hope to continue growing and help as many people as we can.
Now, on the flip side, can you share the biggest obstacles in getting schools to accept donations of CR boxes?
Yeah. So I think the biggest obstacles are the unknown. People aren't familiar with them, and so they're skeptical that they can actually work. It's like, how could something that's made of filters and a box fan and duct tape actually do anything, right? So I think that's part of it. We saw during the pandemic, school districts across the country that don't have personnel who really understand air cleaners or science or engineering spend a lot of money on unproven technologies, in many cases, I would say highly ineffective technologies that had a lot of slick marketing associated with them. The Corsi Rosenthal box doesn't look slick, right? We have 13 publications now that say these in peer-reviewed journals that say these things work great, but people don't read peer-reviewed journals. So I think it's the unknown. They don't look slick. There's been some concerns about perceived fire hazards, which is not correct. Underwriter Laboratories has done tests on these and said they're perfectly safe. Marina Creed has worked with the fire staff at her university that have done separate tests on and say these things are completely safe. We haven't seen them catching on fire, and there's probably hundreds of thousands of them in the world right now, and never heard anything bad about happening. So I think the other part is politics. There are many in our country today that don't want to acknowledge that COVID ever existed. It's almost become a dirty word to even mention it. So if you go to a school district and you talk about reducing the incidence of COVID, that in some ways is a turnoff to the school district. And so while COVID is one of the many benefits, we try to articulate the other benefits, right? Wildfire smoke, but less children having asthma attacks, having allergies, taking exams, it'll improve their scores on exams. You'll have better attendance. And it's a great STEM project for students. I've probably gone on long enough now. I hope that answers your question, but I think those have been the obstacles.
Yes, yeah, excellent answer. Now, what should our government do to reduce risks from airborne infection and pollution like wildfire smoke?
What I would like our government to do, so much I'd like them to do. I mentioned this before, really changing the way we communicate with the public, right? Looking at lots of different platforms, because that's where people get their news. People don't, most of America doesn't get their news from cable news anymore. They get it online from lots of different sources, some respectable and some not. But I think simple, consistent, repeated messaging, like I said before, visual where possible. I'd love to see the government give out block grants to schools for improved HVAC and the use of portable air cleaners in classrooms, but to do it in such a way that the schools are required to use the money for that and not for other things. So that's another thing that can be done, right? There needs to be a check on that. There needs to be a contract between the government and public school districts. I think more research is needed for some unanswered questions, particularly related to health. It's really important that future research include, especially if it's field research, include health scientists and building scientists together, working together hand in hand and not fighting with each other on social media. That is so needed in a real disaster in the pandemic. I think we really should focus on economically disadvantaged families, on underserved communities, school districts and underserved communities. That's where, as we start providing resources, that's where we need to provide the resources. And then, as I said, in our National Academies report, we need to coordinate efforts between federal agencies and state agencies. That would go a long way in and of itself. I would personally love to see in the future something like a Clean Indoor Air Act or amendments to the Clean Air Act that includes indoor air quality and what we can do to improve indoor air quality. That starts with the acknowledgement that most of the air pollution that we breathe during our lives, the air pollution we breathe during our lives is dominated by what we breathe indoors. And that's even true of pollution of outdoor origin. Until we come to that simple recognition, we're probably never going to get to the place of people talking about policy changes and something like a Clean Indoor Air Act. Maybe it'll happen someday. I'm not holding my breath for it to happen in the next few years, but I think we should keep talking about that and keep pushing for it. I hope that answers the question.
Extremely, extremely detailed and welcome answer. So thank you for that. And for our last question, far UVC 222 nanometer lights are not FDA regulated, but people even wear a device on their chest or travel with it. With so many products on the market, is safety for users or the environment or fake products a concern? Do you think far UVC lights should be FDA regulated like other medical devices?
There were a lot of questions in that question. Let me that was a good question. All good questions. So let me sort of detangle this. I'll start by saying, full disclosure, I've never done research with UVC 222. I don't consider myself to be an acknowledged leading authority on the topic. I think it's important for me to acknowledge that. However, I do know enough that I can try to answer the question. So That's the caveat up front. And so I'll kind of give you my best answer. First of all, there was a question about wearables that you wear around your neck or something like that. I'm extremely suspicious of any personalized little device like that. So I would say great caution there. I've seen advertisements for devices that say, I don't remember the exact wording, but it's great for reducing infants' exposure to particulate matter or viruses, something like that. And in that it said, highly effective at removing particles as large as 200 microns. In the air pollution field, a 200 micron particle is essentially a beach ball. We don't have to worry about removing those. They're not going to get very far into our respiratory system. So, I mean, there's sort of statements made by some of these companies that are just scientifically wrong and not factual. So I get red flags all over the place when it comes to wear things around your neck. Doesn't mean that some might be effective. I'm just saying that beware. So UV 222 or far UVC is a really interesting technology. It's based upon a krypton chloride excimer lamp. So you take these two different species and in excited state, and it generates ultraviolet radiation. If the lamps are filtered properly, that's a big question, right? If the lamps are filtered using some kind of optical filter to remove longer wavelength UV, they'll have little impact on skin and eyes, shouldn't cause long-term concerns about skin cancer, which we worry about with UV exposure of our skin. I think if the technology moves forward and is used a lot, there needs to be regulations on assuring that the lamps have the proper optical filters and always remove that longer wavelength UV. So that's number one, right? So I'd say yes, restrictions or whatever needs to be done to make sure that's true of every single product that would be used. It's really important to verify that. There needs to be checks on that. Far UVC has been shown to be highly effective at inactivating viruses in laboratory chambers, room-sized laboratory chambers. I think one of the best studies I saw was out of the UK in 2022. I don't remember the first author's name. I know Kath Noakes was one of the authors. I think the first author was Edie or Eddie, something like that. But there have been very limited studies in actual buildings, and I'd like to see that. I'd like to see more studies in actual buildings before I can say, yeah, this looks like a great technology, right? And I think that's a problem, not having studies in actual rooms and actual buildings. We need research on optimal arrangement of the lamps to account for UV attenuation with distance and any single lamp in actual buildings, and performance over time, both performance of the overall lamp and system, but also performance of that optical filter. Far UVC can also emit ozone, and that's an issue. So it's an issue that I can talk a lot about because a lot of my research at the University of Texas was on indoor ozone chemistry. We have 50 years of research on the impacts of ozone on human beings, and ozone does have detrimental impacts. You increase ozone levels by 10 parts per billion, and we see all sorts of health impacts. If you just look at hospital admissions, mortality, all those things. So we don't want to be inhaling a lot of ozone. So that's a concern. Ozone also reacts indoors with materials and especially unsaturated organic compounds in the air, and you get all sorts of byproducts. We've studied a lot of those byproducts and the amount of byproducts that are formed from ozone in different environments. My research team, literally hundreds of byproducts, depending upon what it's reacting with in the indoor environment. And there's almost no tox data, almost no toxicological data for all of those byproducts. So some look like other chemicals that we know are really bad or toxic. We're not 100% sure because they're not exactly that chemical, right? So there's so much work that still needs to be done to resolve the importance of those byproducts. I guess this is all to say, I think there's promise for UV 222 down down the road, UTC 222, but I still have question marks about some things that need to be resolved. I'll also say that outside of particles, ozone is one of the easiest things to remove from air. It's pretty easy to remove ozone. And so if these devices are going to be used and they do generate some ozone, we have to make sure that there's an ozone control system with them. And I have ideas for putting an insert inside of a CR box that could remove a lot of ozone using kaolinite, a product in clay that easily decomposes ozone with very, very little reaction products. I just gave that away, so maybe somebody out there who's listening can go to their laboratory and try it. So I think more research is needed, but that's sort of what academics say all the time. So yes, we need more research funding. And maybe I'll just leave it at that. I'm not sure that answered your specific question. I think I covered what you wear around your neck, a little bit of background on what these devices are. I do have some concerns. I think we need more studies and more quality checks on them before I'd like to see far-field, widespread use. But I do think there's a lot of potential there if we can overcome some of those issues or prove that they're not big issues. Because they look like they can be quite effective in inactivating viruses in respiratory particles in air.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your participation and for sharing your knowledge with us this evening.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're so grateful.
I do want to say one thing. Somebody in the chat said they saw a mini CR box behind me, and you can maybe see it. A little tiny box. It's actually not a real CR box. One of my staff members works with clay, and so she made this out of clay, but she also knows that I love jelly beans and M&Ms, so the top of it comes off, and it's actually a place where I hide my candy. So it's a highly effective at removing sweets from the air. Yeah.
That's great. I love it. Fantastic. Well, thank you again. Thank you for spending time with us and sharing so much knowledge. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. And Liesl's great. Love your conversation with her.
Oh, I know it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Corsi.
Okay.
We are really fortunate to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So, Christina, please introduce Liesl.
Okay. Okay.
We will follow the schedule.
We'll come back to Dustin. Yes. Liesl McConchie is an expert on learning and the co-author of best-selling book, Brain-Based Learning. With 25 plus years of experience in education, Liesl bridges her knowledge of how the brain best learns with her experience of teaching to create tangible strategies to support teachers and schools. Her background in education includes creating new schools, leading whole school reforms, delivering workshops to educators, and speaking at conferences. As a mom of 3, Liesl has advocated for cleaner air in schools to improve health and cognition. She's a co-founder of the California Alliance for Clean Air in Schools, an advocacy organization working to improve education, legislation, and regulation of air quality in schools. Liesl was an early advocate for Corsi Rosenthal boxes, leading school-wide events to build CR boxes for indoor spaces. Thank you so much for being with us this evening.
It is such a pleasure to be with everyone today.
All right, let's do it. Let's jump in. So, what motivates you to advocate for clean air?
Great question. For me, it is, there's this quote that sometimes it's attributed to Aristotle, sometimes it's attributed to Frederick Buchner, that says some combination, some variation of where your passion meets the world's needs, that's where your vocation lies. And for me, that summarizes like how I got really invested in clean indoor air. So I am really passionate about education. I've spent over 25 years working in the education space. And then, in recent years, and it existed even before, like there's this really big need. There's a really big need. And so my passion for education and a need combining those together has really led me into this work. So I didn't really see my space in this work at the beginning, but as I reflected more after being a passive observer and learner from so many wonderful, brilliant people, including Dr. Corsi that we just heard from, that I realized that I actually do have a space, because I've dedicated my career to helping our education system and to help kids learn. And they can't learn when they're sick all the time. They can't learn in a really unhealthy environment, at least not as well. And when they're sick all the time, they need to be home, and it just impacts brain function at very fundamental ways. And so, as someone who loves learning about the brain and translating cognitive neuroscience for schools, that's what I do for a living, is that I realized that I actually am a science communicator by trade. That's what I do, is I learn and I read about cognitive neuroscience and I translate that for schools. And so I felt that I did have a unique position in this space as someone who understands schools and understands the education system so well and has developed skill sets around translating technical academic scientific information to principals, superintendents, and teachers. So that's what motivates me, is like all the things that I have spent my career around, like helping people understand how to help learning and health schools to be better. Like I can teach you how to design a really awesome lesson plan, really awesome. But none of it's going to be helpful if kids are either home because they're sick or showing up still sick and their brains are not able to pay attention, be as creative, remember things, because the environment and the indoor air quality is so poor that learning can't happen, regardless of whatever magical lesson plan might be existing in schools.
Mm. Can you give an example of how bad the air quality in schools get during a viral surge or an active wildfire?
Yeah, so that's a tricky question, because in one way, I don't know if I'd really say like that the air quality gets worse during a viral surge. It gets more toxic and more unhealthy. It's not like the air quality is likely, if it's bad, then it's probably always bad. It's just whether it's filled with just non-contaminated air or more contaminated air during a viral surge. And so that's why it's so important for us to have clean indoor air year round, so that when viral surges do come, whether it's with like flu that we're experiencing so much right now, or COVID or other things that come and go in different waves and surges, we need to have a baseline of healthy indoor air so that our kids and our teachers are staying healthy and aren't passing illnesses in schools. Now, with wildfire, it's a totally different story. Now, I apologize that I completely missed out on the opportunity to learn from Dr. Corsi. So it's possible that some of this was already addressed, and just like let me know that with wildfires, it's different because, well, it depends on what kind of fire, right? If it's a forest fire that we are probably more familiar with, where it's just trees and forests that are burning, that is definitely not healthy for us to be breathing that air. But it's different from what we have experienced, at least here in California, where I'm from, in the recent month, with more of an urban fire, where you're not just burning wood, trees, leaves, bushes, you're burning plastics, metals, and you're releasing all sorts of toxic chemicals and gases and different VOCs and things like that. So I mean, it's hard to quantify because there's so many variables that go into it, but we'll just say bad, really bad with an exclamation mark, I think is what we'll say for that.
Okay, so what would you say the US needs to do to improve education about in terms of awareness of air quality?
For starters, I think the US needs to just admit, they need to humbly acknowledge that the majority of respiratory viruses are spread through airborne transmission, that they float in the air, and that we can stop pretending that this is like an individual thing, that people just need to wash their hands more, or we need to have 87 more bottles of hand sanitizer in classrooms. But we as a country, as a society, in this country and globally, we just need to admit and acknowledge what the science has told us, that it's so much of this is spread through the air. Not all of it, not all of it. Like people who have had norovirus, the stomach flu in the last few months, and when that was raging, as it's been raging, like that's something that is spread predominantly through fomites, like just touching things. But a lot of other viruses, the ones that are spread most likely in schools like that, is aerosol. So we need to admit that that is what's going on, and that becomes a systemic issue that needs to be handled systemically. And then after education of just like some baseline understanding, then so that would be akin to saying, hey, not all water is safe to drink. Like we should make sure our water's clean, right? We went through that as a country. And then from there, to improve it, I always like think about this formula of like, we need to measure and then mitigate. Like those things need to happen. Like you can't mitigate what you can't measure. Like you wouldn't even know what to do. You were just kind of like, oh, I'm going to randomly do this thing and hope that it works. Like we need to have consistent quality measurements happening in our schools of the air quality, from CO2 levels to PM 2.5 levels, the particulates. And then once we have those measurements, then we can make informed decisions to make our schools safer. Because what's happening right now is it's just kind of like this, he said, she said, like the school said that we're good, it's safe. And then you have like parents who are like, oh, but really, is it? Are you sure? I don't know. Like how do you know? And schools know the importance of like collecting data and having accurate data. And once we have that accurate data, then we can know how to best mitigate.
Great, great. Now, I know you touched on this a bit just now, but if we were going to talk about this in terms of laws and regulations of air quality in schools, what specifically would you like to see?
Contrary to some people's understanding, there actually are laws in place. There are regulations in place for our indoor air quality. They are woefully insufficient. And I don't know, did Dr. Corsi go into like any history around this at all?
Not.
Okay. So we had better indoor air quality regulations as a country, like 100 years ago. It used to be that the regulation was about like 30 CFM per person. And but then back in, I think it was like in the 80s, maybe like the 70s or 80s, don't quote me on the actual year there, that there was a shift. And that was a health-based mitigation. That was all around, 100 years ago. We were the whole Spanish flu and everything. And then we get into like this energy movement and conserving energy, and other needs became a higher priority. So then new regulations were adopted that dropped that down to 15, like it cut it in half. And so our current regulations are 15 CFM, cubic feet per meter per person per second. And that was used to help mitigate, like basically it was odor, like people stinking, because that became the priority. People forgot. People didn't pay attention in their history class or whatever and forgot that our indoor air quality is a way to improve our health, and it serves the purpose to promote our health, and not just to appease our sense of smell. And so what are we proposing? Well, so the regulations do exist. They're woefully insufficient. However, even though they are insufficient, there really isn't robust accountability systems in place to uphold those regulations. So there's two things that need to happen. And this is what I'm working on in the organization that I co-founded here in California, the Clean Air Allies, is that we are looking at these two variables. One, there's the actual laws, there are actual regulations, and the other is the accountabilities, because people are out there shouting, we need to adopt ASHRAE 241, or we need to get back to 30 CFM, or we need to like do this or that. Yes, 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 and yes to all of like great ideas. However, if there's no accountability systems in place, then what difference does it make what the regulation standards are? If schools, if workplaces, if all these other facilities, indoor facilities, aren't even held accountable to a lower standard. So the two variables that we are working on is one, first, how do we improve the accountability systems so that schools are held accountable for the measures in place? Like, think about it. Like in a dream world, let's say that CDC comes out or somebody comes out and says, that's it. We've decided that the new like we're adopting 241 as the new regulatory standard, or we need 30 CFM. We're going back. We're remembering, hey, we woke up from 100-year sleep, and that's right. We should be back to 300 or 30 CFM. That'd be wonderful, but schools aren't even meeting 15. And so it'd be great to have that, but if schools aren't even being held accountable to this lower level, we need to improve the accountability structures. And that's pretty tough. Actually, it's pretty tough because it gets really technical, and I don't think we need to go into all the details of, so which government agency really does oversee this and is responsible for holding schools accountable, and what are the mechanisms for reporting schools that aren't adhering to the regulations, and that whole thing that's really messy and isn't working. It's not working. At least here in California, like there's been reports recently that like 85% of schools, I think, are like not even meeting building code. Like it's just really, really bad. And so we've got to get that system fine-tuned and figured out. And then once we get that figured out, then we can start advocating and trying to push for better legislation, because like maybe it's happening simultaneously in the process of figuring out the COVID account, or sorry, I was distracted by something in the comment, by improving the accountability structures. Maybe then we will also be like, hey, well, while we're talking about it, maybe we should take a look at these actual numbers, and maybe there are things that we could be doing a little bit better, or is this really the numbers we should be holding that are really appropriate in the current climate that we're in, with emerging pandemics, with excessive heat, with climate catastrophes happening at accelerated rates. And so that's what we're proposing: better accountability, better regulations. It's very, we like to call it, we don't like to call it, but we call it like really boring work. Like it's not like, ooh, flashy and really exciting. And the reality is that it's not something that's going to happen overnight. Like these are really long processes that we're engaging in. And you know, some days I wake up and wonder if we'll get there by the time my kids are still in school and, you know, able to benefit from it. But regardless, it's the work that needs to be done. And whomever's children in the future, everyone's children is all of our children's, and whomever in the future is going to benefit, like we're here to do the long, hard work to make that happen.
Great. So what is the Clean Air in Schools initiative that you've developed in recent years?
Yeah, so that's what I was just mentioning. So we are called the Clean Air Allies, and we are a not-for-profit organization. Some really exciting news, as I get really excited, is that we have recently received an offer for fiscal sponsorship, which means we'll be falling under the umbrella very soon of a 501(c) tax exempt status. So we're hoping by about early to mid-March, we'll be, thank you so much for all the applause. We're really excited about it. That we'll be able to just engage at a deeper level. One, it like establishes more credibility. It allows us to apply for grants and to partner with other organizations to make bigger changes. And so, but we've been operating for about, I don't know, 18 months or so already, just working really hard with coalition building. And we realized that this is not just like a COVID related issue, that there are so many organizations that care about this at different ways. So we are linking arms with asthma organizations. We are linking arms with disability rights organizations. We are linking arms with multiple unions who carry tremendous power in some of these arenas, with teachers and different workers' unions. And we are building a coalition and are already just building that strength so that we can accelerate that work as we go forward. We will be launching one of our first big campaign on Monday. So get excited, folks. Our first project is here in California, and we chose California because that's where I and my co-founder, we both live in California. And we believe, looking at the national landscape, we believe that California is often the leader and kind of like goes first on some of these issues. And so we're going to create really big change here in California, and then we'll see where it goes from there as other states, because these regulatory agencies, they're governed at the state level. And so there's some overlap with different states, but the laws are different by every state. So we're really diving into this California system right now and hoping to do both those things I was talking about, like really tightening down those accountability measures and improving those regulations. And but at the same time, we're partnering with a lot of our sister organizations around the country and even around the globe of sharing, doing some like knowledge sharing of what's worked for you over in Illinois. How about over there in Alabama? And how about you guys in Maryland? What are you guys working on? And sharing in that way. But that is, yeah, that's what we're doing. We support like a lot of grassroots efforts, as well as, it's kind of like a two-prong approach, as well as looking at policy and legislative change that's happening. So our first big campaign that's happening on Monday, can I take a minute just to talk about it because I'm so excited?
Sure.
Okay, so here in California, and every state probably has something similar. I just don't know every state's laws that well. But in California, 25 years ago, there was this case brought forth by 100 students, kids, who sued the state of California and sued the Department of Education in California for their constitutional right to a clean and safe learning environment, among a couple other things. There's three big parts of it, but one of them was to a clean and safe learning environment. It was called the Williams case. 5 years later, the governor finally settled the case. And from that came all sorts of new regulatory measures and accountability systems to ensure that schools are safe and healthy places for students and teachers to be. And so one of those is just like the simplest little thing we're starting with is that every single public school, not charters, but every single non-charter public school in the state of California must have what's called a Williams notice posted in every single classroom that tells students, parents, community members, and teachers their rights to a clean and safe environment. So we're just trying to advocate and to educate people in schools that you have a right, a constitutional right in California to a clean and safe learning environment, to look for those notices, share the picture with us. We're doing some really big outreach efforts around this because there just isn't a lot of awareness. Like a lot of families and parents feel really like paralyzed or helpless, that there's nothing that they can do, but there really is. And so this is the first step of a very long, we're going to spend the whole year helping to educate and help people advocate for better and safer learning environments in California. And so please, please, please follow along. We're going to be pushing it on our social media channels starting Monday. If you'd like to get more information on that, you can go to cleanairallies.org, sign up for our newsletter. We'll be pushing out information there of really simple things you can do to help this cause, because we really need as many people as possible joining arms with us, linking arms with us, and helping to accelerate this work. But that's what we're doing organizationally. I've been doing a lot of things individually on my own over the last 5 years that I think we'll talk about here in a couple more minutes. But that's what the organization is: Clean Air Allies, grassroots advocacy, and large scale policy.
So how do you stay motivated to keep educating the community about clean indoor air? And how can people empower themselves to continue doing so themselves as communities experience repeat infections year after year, and as we face added risks of air pollution from natural disasters?
I stay motivated by staying connected to people. It's you. It's all of you who are on this call right now. It's the parents who were texting me this morning and sharing the experiences that they're having with their kid this morning. It's the other phone call I had this morning of another story. By staying connected to the real human level of this crisis that we are in is what continues to motivate. And then when I feel like things are moving really slow, and I feel like when the despair starts to creep in and my motivation starts to slip, then I just like remind myself of having some realistic expectations. Things don't happen overnight. I remember, I don't know if Rich is still on this call. I remember one time being on a call with Dr. Corsi, I don't know, a year and a half ago, something like that. And I was like, this is a moment, this is this new era. Like we're starting this new era. And Rich, like so kindly, like he's just the kindest man on the planet. Hi, Rich. So kindly, just kind of like chuckled and respectfully and humbly reminded me that he's been working in this field since I was like in diapers. You know, he's been publishing and researching. No, you're way younger than that, Rich. I know, but it's just that I'm that young. But he's been like we are standing on the shoulders of giants. Those of us who have jumped into this space in the last 5 years due to the COVID pandemic, there are giants like Dr. Corsi and others who have paved the way for us. And so I just stay connected to people like Dr. Corsi. I learn from history. Like I'll go back and I'll read the progression of what happened with the clean water movement. And it wasn't like all of a sudden, oh my gosh, the day after we discovered that dirty water makes us really sick, boom, all of a sudden regulations are in place and everyone's drinking clean water. You'd think it would be that fast, and it should be. And in the meantime, it's really, really hard for us. Like, and I want to honor that and acknowledge how difficult it is for us who are in this phase. But when we look to our elders who teach us and who fought for our rights in many aspects before us. Like that's our work to do now. Those of us who know and can find a way to see whatever talent or gift I have that might be able to contribute to this space, how can I use that for good? And then, and honestly, I wrote, I wrote an article, like a blog post, I don't know, in 2018, I think, on the neuroscience and psychology of hope. And I know that in the landscape that we're in right now, for many people, as we are transitioning to a new administration, that there's a lot of people who are feeling hopeless. And so I actually often go back, this might be a little bit like narcissistic or something, but I go back to my own writing and I remind myself, because it's a language that I understand, is the language of like cognitive neuroscience. I reread that article, and I reread it recently because I was feeling really despondent about the current climate of things. And I was reminded that the way that we foster hope, the way we stay in the space of hope is, it's not like, oh, just like cross your fingers and like hope for the best, but I actually use this physiology of like crossing fingers to remind me of the science of hope, because when you dive into the science, hope actually requires two things. Oh, look at that, we're celebrating. I got some balloons there behind me. So if you like cross your fingers, it reminds me of the two variables that's required for hope. One is that hope requires, the science calls it like, you need to have a pathway and you need to have agency. If we were to translate that, it would be, you need to have a will and a way. Like if there's a will, there's a way. You need to have a way. You need to be able to see a clear path to getting where you want to go, to reaching your goal. And so for me, that's what the work that we're doing at Clean Air Allies is, okay, we have this path. We are going to use the Williams case as our first stepping stone. We're working on accountability and regulations, and this is going to be the path to get us here. We've chosen this path because we have spent the last 5 years trying to like email research articles to principals and to teachers about how important clean indoor air is, with no success. That there isn't some magical research study, we'd wish, there isn't some magical research study that we're just like finally is going to convince people. Like we really need to go through this regulatory process. And so that's like, that's the pathway. And then the agency is our own motivation, is, do I believe that I can travel this path? And I do believe that. So what motivates, that's what motivates me, is connecting to people, hearing stories, learning from our elders, and then reminding myself when despair starts to sink in, that all I need is two things. I just need to have a clear direction and then the strength to just take one step forward in that direction. And we are going to, little by little, continue to make progress.
Great. Thank you so much. That's an amazing answer. Thank you. So what is a wise next step for parents, teachers, students if schools initially dismiss efforts to employ cleaner indoor air standards? So
Been there. Been there. You are not alone, for those of you who've been in that space. So on my my top secret website that I built for people wanting to advocate for clean indoor air in school spaces, I call it top secret because you can't find it if you just go to my website. You need to have the link, but it's just lieslmcconchie.com/clean_air_advocates. If someone would be willing to drop that in the chat for people, that'd be really helpful. But in that, I outlined this 5-step process to advocate for clean indoor air in schools. And the first step is to build relationships with the key decision makers. Is that like they need to know that we're not just coming in as like a one issue crazy parent kind of mentality, that we really we care about the school, we care about what else is happening, we volunteer on the PTA or whatever we can do, and we get to know them, we build relationships so that we can establish that trust with them. And then the second step is to understand what the values are. What are the core values of that decision maker? And this goes into what I've learned over the years around like motivation theory and human drivers. So from that relationship, you'll be able to understand, does this decision maker really value like equity? Is that just like core, like deep in their soul? Or do they value like just job security and they just need to make sure that they keep their job? Do they value like notoriety? Do they want to be like the famous, like I'm principal of the year of the state or whatever? And no judgment for any of those, but what is it that really drives their behavior? And so then when we have moments and experiences where we get rejected, our efforts to advocate or to donate something gets rejected, then I go back to that. Go back to what are those core drivers? What are the values that this person espouses? And how can I connect this? How can I connect my advocacy to that? Is it test scores? Is that all they care about? Well, then let's talk about how clean indoor improves test scores. Clean indoor improves test scores. If it's equity, absolutely. Let's talk about how poor indoor air quality disproportionately impacts marginalized communities. If it's like notoriety and fame, great. Hey, guess what? You know, this whole absenteeism crisis that's happening in schools, I'd like to help you, Mr. Principal so-and-so, Mrs. Principal so-and-so, to be the hero of this story. You can be the one in the district who like figures it out that having clean indoor air is going to help student absences. It's going to decrease student absences and your teacher absences. Because I know you, Miss Principal, don't love being woken up at 5 o'clock in the morning with another teacher texting you that they're sick. So there's so many different ways, like whatever it is that drives them, you can connect indoor air quality to all of them, because our indoor air quality permeates all of those spaces. And so I say just like, take a deep breath, calm yourself, don't react and get like aggressive, and just be like, okay, we care about the same things. We all care about kids. And then how can I step back, re-strategize, and approach this in a way that better connects to what their core values is? And that like, we just gotta listen. We gotta listen, like, what, like, why are you saying no to me donating this HEPA filter? Why are you, it's like, kindly ask the questions and really listen to what their, like, what is their point of friction, and then find a way to like work around it.
Great. Okay, so final question. Sound of the fans from CR boxes gets pushback from certain educators. Do you hear these complaints from schools that actually use them? And if so, what, if any, workarounds can address that?
Oh my gosh, this is a fabulous question. I'm so glad that someone asked this question. Okay. Have I heard about it? Yes, I've heard about it. So my kid's kindergarten teacher last year, just to balance out the anecdotes that are flying around, my kid's kindergarten teacher ran the CR box on level 3 every day, all day, never complained. That was her choice. I was like, hey, if you like, just keep it on level 1. She's like, no, crank that thing up. And she never even like noticed it. She's like, yeah, it sometimes feels like some like white noise. So here's what I want to say on this topic. I want to have like a nuanced conversation that's more than 140 characters on like a tweet. The sound of a CR box is highly dependent on a lot of variables. It's acoustics, right? So depending on the height of the ceiling in the room, the different materials that the wall is made of, or other pieces of furniture in the room are going to impact the perception of how loud it sounds in a room. And so just because you've heard someone say, oh my gosh, CR boxes are way too loud, does not mean that they're too loud for the space that you want to put them in. And just a reminder that a CR box, the studies that have been done on CR boxes, Corsi Rosenthal boxes, going from level 1 to level 2 to level 3 isn't like a linear relationship, or it's like, not like, oh my gosh, it's like level 2 is twice as effective as level 1, or level 3 is 3 times more as efficient as level 1. No. Yes, level 2 and level 3 are an improvement from level 1, but a Corsi Rosenthal box on level 1 is incredible. Incredible. Like, you can barely find anything under 300 bucks. Maybe, I don't even know, that even comes close to it. So what I would say is stick with level 1, see how you do. And it also, like when we're talking about schools, because that's what we're here talking about, with schools, it also depends on the kind of like pedagogy that's happening in that classroom. So if it's a space that is a very traditional, old school style of teaching, where it's like very authoritative and the teacher wants silence in the room and only the teacher is talking and everyone else should be silently listening, then sure, you'll notice the sound of the CR box more. Versus what I love to promote professionally is a more active, social, peer-based learning environment. Then it's like the least of your concerns noise-wise. When you have kids who are working together, collaborating and exploring concepts together, then like it just kind of like fades into the background. So there's so many variables that come into play. And I just wouldn't want anyone to like poo-poo on a CR box just because they've heard people, there was a day or two where people were really worked up about the sound. But if there is, the perfect storm of a certain classroom that's constructed in a way that it's really like loud and echoey, with a teaching style that really promotes silence, and so it's heard more. And, for whatever reason, it does feel like it's or sounds louder than is tolerable, then yeah, there's alternatives. You'll either pay for it, or you'll probably have to build it yourself with like some PC fans or something like that. But you're going to lose out on efficiency or on money saved, generally speaking.
Okay, excellent answer. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. We all really appreciate your expertise and your passion and your advocacy.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just scanning the chat to see if there's anything, or maybe someone else. Was there something that, yeah, Mark, I hear you.
We're actually going to be taking a 5-minute break for now, and then we'll be hopping back on.
Okay, great. I'll scan the chat to see if there's any questions worth addressing.
Yeah, that would be great. Liesl, if you scan the chat and actually answer some of the question in chat, so we can all take a break, bathroom break if anyone need it, and water break, drink some water, stay hydrated, and we'll be right back. Hello, Dustin.
Hi,
Thank you so much for joining us.
happy to be here.
Christina is going to introduce you again.
Take 2.
Dustin Drury, former TV producer turned clean air advocate. He and volunteers from Clean Air LA table daily at Amoeba Music, distributing free clean air tools and teaching people on Hollywood Boulevard how to wear a respirator. In tandem with other community groups, CALA volunteers have been building Corsi Rosenthal boxes and distributing them and other PPE across LA. CALA started in 2024 to provide tools to mitigate COVID, but have since grown due to wildfire air quality. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Dustin.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd love to acknowledge Dr. Corsi and Liesl. Like, what an honor to be here presenting the same time as they are. All this clean air work is kind of happening in tandem, and they inspire us, we inspire them. It's all amazing. I'd also like to just acknowledge the other clean air organizers in LA. We got Clean Air LA, Mask Block LA, and Orgasmic. And like, it's just a wonderful network of mutual aid groups who are providing the tools to LA that are necessary, whether it's making CR fans and boxes, dropping off, picking off masks or filters, or just supporting or educating our community to the best of our ability. It's just like a lot of people doing the work on the ground for no capital, but just because we know the work needs to be done and the government has no interest in really acknowledging us or supporting us, so we're going to do it regardless.
Awesome. So what's the mission of Clean Air LA?
At its core, Clean Air LA is grounded in disability justice. Our goal is accessibility through clean air tools, air filters, masks, and more. We started last summer kind of having conversations about where we wanted to be and what we wanted to be doing. And, you know, when we distilled it all down, we believe that accessibility is our biggest issue. And we kind of decided to focus originally in community and art spaces, and that's kind of still where we are because that's where we felt personally we had the most ability to affect change. Like Liesl has kids and wants to affect schools. We didn't feel like we had the ability to affect schools. Like we didn't really feel like we have the ability to affect prisons. Like we believe everyone deserves clean air and it's a human right, but we were trying to focus on kind of where we thought we could affect the most change. And so at this point, we're not just offering the tools, we're also educating people how to use the tools to the best of our ability. We're basically filling in a lot of what public health has failed us here in LA. And it's a big ask, but we're doing our best. And like with all the clean air tools, like I also want to acknowledge one of them is digital accessibility, which we're doing a great job here, giving accessibility to the people who can't go out to actual in-person events and stuff like that. So like that's part of, communal spaces need to be accessible to even the people who are homebound and stuff like that. And like our original intended goal was just kind of like, oh, I guess maybe we just kind of support events and we figure out what clean events look like. And like it kind of evolved as we were, nobody wanted our tools for 6 months. Nobody wanted anything. And so we were kind of like, well, is there even a need in LA for this stuff? What do we need? And so we started distributing masks and we started distributing COVID tests and anything free we could get from the county. And then the fires happened and all of a sudden everyone wanted our stuff. And so like even tonight or this week, we've had 2 events that we've supported. One that was a reading of a pilot earlier this week that had clean air tools and was fully masked. And then tonight there's a drag show that one of our members is supporting with clean air tools of all kinds to just, again, make these places as accessible as possible, because that's the goal, is to not only make things accessible for people like us who are mitigating, but also try to figure out how to create a world where not only we're all surviving together, but we can thrive together.
Awesome. I love it. So has anything about working directly with the public on mask and air purifier distribution surprised you?
I'm surprised when people don't want free stuff. Like we at this point, like my partner is at Amoeba right now. As soon as I'm off the call, I'm gonna go meet them there and distribute stuff, being mostly masks and CR fans at this point. But like people kind of like are very standoffish when you're like, hey, do you want this for free? And they're like, wait, really? Because like people are so locked into capitalism, charging for literally every breath of air, basically, that they're like, wait, are you actually, like, what's the catch? What do I have to sign? What are you trying to sell me? And like, we're not trying to sell anything. We're just trying to go, hey, we believe everyone deserves clean air tools. We're going to give them to you for free, and we're going to teach you how to use them for free. And so I'm always also surprised, like, how open a lot of people are. Like, on the streets, people come up to us And like some people are obviously standoffish and we just kind of let them pass by. But the people who know that we're offering them something that is useful stop and they're kind of like, oh yeah, well, what do we need the masks for at this point? And that messaging has changed over the past month, right? It started, hey, you need to protect yourself from wildfire, so you need to be ready for the next wildfire. Well, a lot of people are sick right now. And so at this point, we're just telling people, hey, we got free stuff. If you want us to teach you how to use it or you want to use it, we're going to give it to you. And once they come in and they want to talk to us, that's when then we go, okay, well, we can give you more information. We like someone takes one mask, we encourage them to take 2, we encourage them to take 20, we encourage them to take 100. We're like, hey, how many can we give you and what do you need for you, your family, your community, whoever it is? And if you're going to take more than one, I need to make sure you know how to use it properly, because I can't have you take 50 duckbill masks that you've never put on before and then start giving them to your friends and then they all wear them improperly. Um, and so I've been impressed with people's ability and willingness to listen and engage, because we've all been kind of gaslit for the past bunch of years into thinking that we're this isolated community and nobody wants what we're selling. But people do know. And like the funniest thing for me is like we'll be standing there at Amoeba and we'll be like, free masks, free COVID tests, and like we don't even really mention the COVID tests at this point. They see them because like we don't want to say the word COVID because there's so much trauma connected to the word COVID that we literally just say free stuff for this week. This week we've just gone, hey, free stuff, anything is free on our tables. People will walk by and they'll kind of like slowly clock the COVID tests, and then they'll make it 10 steps back, and then they'll turn around and be like, oh, I'm gonna grab a couple of these, and they'll be like, can I have a few? And we're like, yeah, take as many as you want, everything's free, take it all. And so like there's this acknowledgement that people like see the stuff and they know they need it, but there's so much trauma blocking them from wanting to take it that like when you have the opportunity and you kind of get them to let a little light into their brain, we try to get as much in there as we can, whether it's educating or more tools or, hey, you want an air filter? We have free air filters. And people are like, no, that's not free. You're lying to me. And I'm like, no, it's free. We'll give it to you. This CR fan that we built, and thank you to the Corsi Foundation. Thank you, Liesl, for building them, and all not all of them, but a bunch of them. About, I think we got 100 built and then like 70 unbuilt that we've been building from them. And like my favorite thing that we've been doing lately is like people will be like, that's not free, really? I'll be like, it is free, but you need to put on a mask properly and show me you know how to wear a respirator. And then people light up and they're like, oh wow, really? And I'm like, yep, do it. And they'll do it. And then they'll wear a mask properly, and then they'll get a free air filter. And like just like the positive reaction to everything, I would say, is the most surprising thing that I've had in the past month in terms of just being on the streets, and the majority of the people extremely happy to see us, telling us thank you. And like a month and a half ago, we would have been like spit at, but like the past month, people love us.
Mm.
I just want to add that I've seen your live recording when you actually give away stuff and show people actually wear the mask and they look at you and they watch, and all these people gather around the table. Is really fascinating. Thank you so much for doing that.
And like part of the reason, we started this Clean Air LA last summer, and like I learned by watching people like Abby Maller, Abby Babs from the internet, if you know Babs, I think was on the last one of these, Nickel Pin, and these other people who were kind of showing what it could look like to be doing cool stuff on the internet in a mask. And so I personally learned from them, and then was kind of like, okay, well, I think that's the path to getting more people to masks, just making it cool. And so my partner and I have been going to concerts since 2021. We never stopped masking. We've been masking the whole time. And so there was that trauma period where we were scared to kind of share ourselves being in these places because there was so much negative backlash. Oh, maskers still masking in 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025. And so it took a little bit of like healing our own trauma to then be confident enough to go, hey, we're gonna show ourselves doing this stuff and show that you can try to create more accessibility and spaces. And like we also identified, just by being in the spaces and representing the rest of the mitigators in the world, there was power in that, and going, oh, if we're not occupying spaces, people forget we exist. And so we do need people mitigating in all the public spaces we can, so that way people don't forget we exist, and more power in numbers. And I'm going to respond to a quick question in the chat. Donna asks, how do we afford to give away free tests and masks and filters? Well, so far, everything has either come from the county, that tests and masks early on were coming free through LA County. And then filters, everything's been donated through Corsi Rosendahl Foundation, Liesl, and then other mutual aid groups giving us, like, we haven't spent almost a dime yet. Like, we've gotten a bunch of money and we've bought a few tools. Like, we got a tent so we can protect yourself from the rain. We got a couple little things like that. But, you know, almost everything we've done so far has been free.
That's fantastic. So how can individuals create a clean air club in their own community?
I mean, there's two ways. Like, if there's already one that exists, try to tap into them, right? Like, reach out, see if you can, but also understand that a lot of them, especially in LA right now, we've been inundated with, like, a lot of people want to help out, and like, we just haven't had the manpower to go, hey, yeah, we can take 100 new volunteers and onboard them and get them going. So like, if you reach out, like I reached out to Mask Block LA like a year ago and never heard anything. So like, that's part of why we started Clean Air LA, was because we just didn't get a response. So we were like, okay, well, they're doing that. Maybe we can do something else. And so like, I think the best thing you can do, start carrying tools to share, start offering tools to share. Like, we kind of jokingly say, if you're doing mask block work, you are a mask block at that point. Like, you know, if you see somebody else that's wearing a mask, chances are that person might be your friend, and maybe talk to them. Maybe the two of you are the people who are going to start a mask block. Like, it's 2025. Anyone that's wearing a mask in public right now, like, at least aligns maybe on some level with, you know, maybe some morals or maybe some kind of alignment socially or politically. And so I know we've all been gaslit into thinking that like we're alone and nobody wants, and we're the wrong ones, the scarlet letter, dot dot dot, all the bad stuff. But the reality is, like, there's a lot of mitigators everywhere, and we need those like lighthouses to go, okay, where's my people, and how do we find each other? And so I encourage people to find any community organization that is masking in your community, try to tap into them, try to do whatever you can. Like, you know, even if it's just like, hey, I'm going to start carrying 20 masks with me in my bag, and if I see someone in a lower grade mask, maybe I'll offer them a respirator to upgrade their thing. And like, that's all it takes to start. And so like, I think just doing anything to start is the hardest part, because it's scary.
Yeah. So has the Red Cross partnered with local groups like Clean Air LA in providing mask donations or high efficiency air filters for communities affected by the LA fires?
Please apologize me. I apologize for laughing at that question, but when I first read it, I thought it was a troll question, because like, I've been personally irate with Red Cross in terms of how they have come into our evacuation centers, and they've had no masking. In terms of the people who are Red Cross, have had no masking, have not, like, I've been in there, I've talked to people, they're all unmasked. Like, it is enraged me, especially once we had a norovirus outbreak that was reported in LA Times, our mayor going into all these places unmasked. So we do have filters in some of these Red Cross places. We have not partnered with Red Cross. They have not reached out to us at all, other than to ask us to pick up air filters that were in places. I don't know, like, we being like all the clean air orgs, plus like Joaquin Beltran, we're getting air filters and masks early on. Like, the first 2 days, like, we were the ones getting stuff into Pasadena specifically, was kind of the biggest one to start. And so Red Cross knows who we are. They know who I am. I talked to them multiple times. I did get a call last week from them to pick up one of the filters from a Red Cross location that was shutting down. And then I got another call that was like, hey, who are you? Why am I calling you? And I was like, I don't know, Red Cross. Why are you calling me? But long story short, I explained to them, we still have filters in a couple of your locations. You're welcome to use them as long as there's people in those locations. But other than that, we've had no contact with Red Cross. They haven't been interested in working with us or talking to us, other than just kind of like our forced entry on the Pasadena evacuation center. Not forced entry, but like we went in going like, hey, we're putting this stuff here, and we kind of beat them to it, to be honest. Like most of the stuff we placed was placed before Red Cross had taken over. Because they all these places were opening up, and then like 3 to 4 days later, Red Cross was coming in to run them. So they were run by like the city or the county at first, and then Red Cross took over after like 3 or 4 days. And so most of our stuff was placed before Red Cross was there.
Well, speaking to more grassroots, so how can people join the grassroots movement in terms of distribution of free masks, COVID test kits, CR boxes?
Yeah, I mean, again, like just start doing it. Just start like in LA, thankfully there is, so like there used to be easier ways to get this stuff for free, right? Like in LA, you can still go to the library and get free COVID tests and free masks right now. I don't know if they're limiting the masks. You can go to Mask Block or Clean Air LA and we'll give you basically unlimited masks if you want them. But the library might be kind of limiting that right now. But the county still does have a program here in LA that you can get if you request them and you're an org of some kind. And like we're just a mutual aid org. We're not a not-for-profit. We're tiny. Like we've existed for 6 months and we're mostly just like 20 people figuring this stuff out at this point. And so, like I said, like I think I said this earlier, just like see where you can find free resources. If you can get stuff for free, collect it and then start giving it to your friends. Like people just don't know that this stuff is available at the library. Like the reason we're set up at Amoeba Daily is because it has visibility and people know where to find this stuff now every day. And the reality for the air in Los Angeles is everybody living in Altadena, everyone living in the Palisades, these people are going to need these tools for a long time. Just because the media cycle isn't talking about the fires anymore doesn't mean that this emergency is over. Like these people, every day that they're in there stirring this stuff up, rebuilding this stuff, all these toxins are getting recirculated into the air. Still every day in LA, when there's gardeners out blowing their air blowers, toxic dust is getting recirculated in the air. And so I brought it back to LA. Long story short, just find where you can get resources free and start distributing them. Like that's my advice. And then find those like-minded people and like make sure you align on what you want to accomplish. Pick a focus and just start walking towards it. It might take a while. Like it took us, right? It took us almost 7 months before anyone really wanted our stuff. Like we probably distributed, I don't know, 500 masks in 6 months, and then all of a sudden we've distributed 50,000 masks just from like our own stuff, like not counting Mask Block LA and Orgasmic, but just like from through Clean Air LA. Like I don't know, and that's just like an estimate. I don't even know. Like it's more of a collective thing where we've done hundreds of thousands since the fire started all together. It's been unreal.
It's all amazing though. It's all amazing. And so for our final question, as cleanup begins in the LA fire zones and debris gets moved, do you find people worry about and want guidance on the hazards of moving debris and the air quality issues? And do you have any links specifically that you could share with information on those issues?
I don't have links right now, but I know my friend Victoria in the chat will have some great links to share. So Victoria, please share all the good links about what this question is about, and then I'll talk about it. And so, yeah, we get a lot of people coming going like, is it safe to go home? What is the reality of the air quality? And like, I'm most of the time, I'm just a dude on Hollywood Boulevard talking to people, and like, I'm not an expert. I'm not a scientist. I have aligned myself with a lot of these good people, and Clean Air LA has worked hard to find researchers and people who are working on getting this data, but a lot of the data still really isn't out. Like the air quality stuff is like still up in the air because it's like, okay, well, anytime that they're doing any of this cleanup stuff, well, the people in those areas need to be masking because of the toxic dust. And then they're like, oh yeah, well, when wind's blowing in certain directions, that toxic dust might be getting to Hollywood, might be getting to past like these different neighborhoods. And so like me personally at this point, if I'm outside, I'm wearing a mask. I live near the 101. There's constant construction going on near me. There's like the wind is blowing and stuff could be getting here. So at this point, I went from normalizing masking indoors because of COVID and flu and ... to now normalizing masking outdoors. So now I'm just a guy who masks pretty much everywhere all the time at this point, except for in my home when I have air filters running and I know who I'm hanging out with. And so check out the links that Victoria linked in there. And then B, we're just trying to be as honest as possible with people when they come up to the table or they reach out to us. And we're just going, hey, here's what we know so far. Again, we're not experts. I know you trust us more than you trust the CDC, or maybe you trust the LA Public Health at this point. And that's just because we have been as transparent as we can be, and we will continue to be. We're going to continue to, if we get data, we're going to share data. If we get information, we're going to share information. And like, I know I've had a handful of kids who were, I say kids, they're in their 20s, but they were insurance adjusters. And they're like, hey, I'm going to Altadena tomorrow. What do I need? I'm like, you need a P100, first of all, and you need to tell your employer that they need to provide all this PPE. And if they're not, you need to raise a fuss and make sure you're getting it. And so like, that labor issue on top of it all is like a huge thing that we want to address, and we're trying to help people with. And so like, anybody who reaches out, we'll give the most honest answer we can give. We're not gonna like sugarcoat it and make it seem better than it might be, or like, we also we'll try not to catastrophize and make it sound worse than it actually is. We'll try to go, here's what we know, here's how we're mitigating it, and we'll link to like certain things. Like I know in Pasadena, they were distributing basically all the PPE you're supposed to have to go to a cleanup, whether that's Tyvek suits and all the other stuff. And like I said, like we're a bunch of people with certain focuses of what we're good at. And like, I happen to be the guy that's good at talking about stuff. I don't have all the knowledge, but like I'm a loud white guy, and like I can use that privilege to kind of get voices out there about stuff that maybe isn't being seen. And like, that's how I see myself in this movement of clean air, is like, I'm not afraid to be visible. I'm not afraid to be loud. I know I'm of the protected class of the white male American, and I'm going to use that privilege to advocate for disability justice, advocate for the vulnerable, advocate for anybody who is a class that is not supported in this country, and that's almost everybody.
Amazing work you're doing. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here with us tonight. We all really, really appreciate it.
Last thing I just want to say is, I know a lot of people in our community are in mourning for our comrade Phila Heather, and I just want to say lots of love to everybody mourning Phila Heather today, because she reached a lot of us in a great way. So thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dustin.
Okay, so I'm going to pass the mic to our founder, to Julie. She'd like to share a few words with us.
I want to express my deep thanks to all our wonderful speakers and to everyone else for being with our community here. All the education materials will be so important because we are now on our own in this government takeover that's making federal public health agencies undependable. Plutocracy has replaced democracy in America. Racist, reckless, and dangerous executive orders are installed to marginalize immigrants, trans people, women, people of color, and people with medical conditions and disabilities. This is right now a constitutional crisis. All these overreaching executive orders, including withdrawing America from the World Health Organization, burying data and pausing data collection on dangerous virus, will inflict on all Americans and the world great harm and injustice. This public health leadership vacuum demands that educators and advocates like us speak out against destruction of the infrastructure of domestic and global health. We at Mask Together America will not back down from advocating for sickness prevention, as we have done so since our campaign started in 2020. COVID-19 has killed my friends, disabled millions of Americans. We will never forget that. Today, Despite huge challenges in front of us advocates, we will continue to charge forward to fight for prevention. We oppose forcing COVID infection in pursuit of an impossible to achieve herd immunity by officials who struck off the life-shortening impacts from lasting damages to precious organs. I can attest that to fight misinformation, we must continue to advocate cleaning the air, vaccination, universal masking, sick leave, testing, healthcare for all, monitoring of disease activities, and accountable public health guidance. Almost 1 in 4 people rely on Medicaid for healthcare in the U.S. broken healthcare system. In our country, medication and medical care are simply unaffordable without adequate healthcare coverage. Today, Congress is planning severe cuts to Medicaid program. Many people won't get needed care, even cancer treatment or screenings. Many will face huge medical debt. Without care, people will lose their precious lives. We must ask Congress to reject cuts to Medicaid. An attack on one group is a threat to us all. And we stand up for trans justice, reproductive justice, racial justice, health justice, and disability justice. Together, we will continue to fight for telehealth, clean air regulations, accurate and timely data, infection control in healthcare, vaccines for all, affordable tests and treatments, long COVID, medical trials, awareness and prevention, public health awareness and education, policies and tools that keep people healthy. And we must stop mask bans. Instead of banning masks, elected officials should encourage people to use PPE to prevent sickness. Last but not all, after seeing LA firefighters battle urban wildfires without mask protection from the toxic air, Mask Together America launched a Protect Firefighters Initiative. Cancer, heart disease, and mental health disorder are top causes of death among firefighters after exposures to toxins, carcinogens, poisonous smoke gases, and particulates during fires and cleanup. And firefighters need PPE that won't restrict mobility, and you can wear them for a long time. And so what we did is we reached out to American Medical Manufacturer Association to ask for their collaboration. After lots of phone calls, and I'm very grateful to the 2 AMMA members, Eddie Fanico, AMMA co-founder, CEO of Lutema, Vida, and Claudio Dante, president of Dantec Safety Specialists, for supporting our initiative. Together, we have pledged a donation of 780 Comfort Air 400 series elastomeric respirators with P100 multiple gases vapor filter cartridges to provide each of the 34 stations of LA firefighters involved in the recent catastrophic wildfires with a valuable options, because masks are not mandated for firefighters. They can choose whether they wear masks or not. And we want to suggest that they can use these better PPE if they choose to, instead of the specialized apparatus that requires carrying heavy oxygen tanks, which only last for 30 to 45 minutes. We hope this educational initiative inspires more firefighters to use PPE that are breathable, lightweight, and protect them. And we also hope that, this seeing firefighters wearing PPE, more people will be aware that they need to avoid exposure to these toxic air, wildfire smoke, and start wearing masks. Masking for all of us is an act of self-love and community care. And I thank you all for supporting Mask Together America. Now, Christina will introduce the two proud members of the American Medical Manufacturing Association.
Great job, Julie. Thank you so much. I don't think Claudio is here, though. I don't see him in the chat. Use his camera. Hi.
Here we go.
Hello.
Here we go.
Hello.
Hello, folks. Of
Glad we figured that out. Thank you for joining us.
course.
Okay, so let's get started. Claudio Dente is co-founder of Dentech Safety Specialists, along with his wife Judy. Dentech Safety Specialists is a family-owned and operated business. Claudio has devoted his entire career to the personal protective equipment market. He has 44 years of experience in the design, development, distribution, and manufacturing of personal protective equipment. One of his key areas of expertise is the manufacturing of respiratory protection. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
My pleasure.
Okay, so for our first question, what are the differences in requirements between elastomeric respirators made for workers like frontline health workers and firefighters?
Elastomeric respirators, whether they're a half mask or a full face piece, are basically the same product for all industries. The difference that we have in, think of it from an industrial perspective first, because that's what's been around the longest. Our respirators are used to protect people working in refineries, working construction for silica dust, the lead asbestos abatement programs, and things of that nature. In the healthcare market, using an elastomeric respirator is relatively new, although there are several healthcare and hospital associations in the United States that have been using elastomeric respirators for many years. The difference that's happened since COVID attacked us is that an elastomeric respirator without an exhalation valve did not exist prior to this pandemic. Okay, so in October 2020, the CDC says don't wear a respirator, a disposable respirator, or any kind of respirator with an exhalation valve, because the concern is that the user could expel the virus if they were subject to that in a healthcare setting. Okay. CDC also came to the manufacturing community, the people like myself that make respirators, and said, could you please develop a reusable half mask respirator without an exhalation valve so that we can bring it to market for healthcare and frontline workers. Folks, ladies and gentlemen, I've been around for 44 years and I've never conducted this test because I was concerned that how am I as a user going to feel about wearing a disposable respirator versus a reusable elastomeric respirator? My perception was it's hotter, it's more uncomfortable, and so forth. Well, shame on me, it's the exact opposite. So to illustrate that, I conducted, before we developed our Comfort Air NX series half mask respirator without an exhalation valve, I conducted a series of physical experiments to compare a respirator, a rubber respirator without an exhalation valve to a disposable respirator without an exhalation valve, because that's what you should only use when dealing with a pandemic situation, right? So what did the crazy professor here do? So I wore the respirator and I created this, I simulated this experiment of a healthcare worker dealing with someone who's coming in and has a pandemic. So they come in to greet me. I talk to them for a few minutes. I get their situation. What are you feeling? So on and so on. And so what I did was I wore all these masks. I wore a disposable and our mask. I put a temperature thermometer inside the mask with a probe with a tiny little wire so I could measure the temperature inside the mask, okay? And I conducted this 18-minute experiment talking to the patient for about 2 to 3 minutes. And I recorded the temperatures at intervals, 15 seconds, 45 seconds, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and so on and so on. I can't remember the exact details right now, but I'd be happy to share that testing data with anybody that's interested. After the interview, I got up and I walked around our distribution center at 500, 600 paces at an accelerated rate. What I wanted to do was to increase my breathing rate. I wanted to make the mask as hot as I could inside under normal healthcare settings. Let's remember that a healthcare worker is working in a controlled temperature, controlled humidity. They're not exposed to the challenges that someone in construction might be working in very hot and humid environments, right? So I simulated activity, and then I came back to my desk, talking to the patient again. And then I blew into the mask like trying to blow up a balloon, right? 20 breaths, hard, trying to get the temperature up. And then I sat for the rest of the rest of the experiment. And here's what absolutely floored me. And I can't remember the exact numbers. Again, I'll be happy to share with you. Disposable N95 respirators that we selected. It was my own brand that I sell, but it was also a national leading brand that's out in the marketplace. I did a couple. Our respirator was 2 degrees cooler Fahrenheit inside the mask. I was shocked. Okay, and I'm going to use a number for a number I can't remember, but let's say the disposable respirator was 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The reusable was 88.
Mhm.
Okay. So I thought, my goodness, what the heck's going on here? Right? I've been in this business 44 years and I never did this comparison. So I said, no, I got to do something more aggressive. So my chiropractor, who is a long distance road cyclist, I told him about what I was working on at the time. It was during the pandemic, of course. And I said, would you mind doing the same experiment for me on your training bike? Because he trains in the evening on his bike inside. Okay. And the information was the same. He's a fit gentleman. He's 35 years old. He's a lean, mean machine. And he was riding at 25 miles an hour for 18 minutes, the same time period as I conducted my study on, and it was the same. And he said something interesting to me. He said, Claudio, the harder I breathed during my exercise, the easier it was to breathe in your respirator. The medical mask collapsed because of the humidity from his breath, right? So they didn't function properly. So what did we learn from this exercise? A reusable half-mask respirator, and I can speak of mine, folks. I know there's not many without an exhalation valve that came to the market that are NIOSH approved, but I can speak of mine. It's more comfortable, it's safer, because you can get a rubber to skin seal, right? A disposable N95 respirator is made out of a polyester substrate material that when you put it on, you have to shape it. You have to form it to fit your mask. And as you breathe into that mask, the material gets hot and it gets softer and it loses its pliability. So the second time you go to put it on, you take a break and you put it back on, it's almost impossible to secure a seal. With a rubber mask, every time you put it on, once you're properly fit tested on it, right, you will get a proper seal every time you put the mask on. Hope that helps, Christina.
Yes, absolutely. That's an amazing answer. Thank you. So speaking about elastomerics, I mean, why specifically do you make elastomeric respirators, and what would you say the advantages are?
Well, our factory's been making elastomeric respirators for 30 plus years, and we've been serving general industry, right? Construction, refineries, manufacturing, paint spray, and so forth. So it's been in the marketplace for a long time, and there's a tremendous need for it. And the reason is that when you go beyond particles, so a viral particle, right? It's a particle. In industry, aerosol-based particles are things like lead, asbestos, silica dust. That's what we deal with day in, day out. But we also deal with gases and vapors. So we sell charcoal cartridges that have a carbon that's treated to filter out, not filter, that's not the right word, but they remove organic vapors, acid gases, ammonia. We have a super cartridge that does everything, right? Within the limits of the allowable limits when you can use a half mask respirator. So that's why we've been using it. But now moving it into the healthcare setting, right? Trying to move people from disposable products to reusable products is the next challenge, is the next step, an evolution, I'll call it, for the use of elastomeric respirators.
Thank you. That's so moving on. What motivated you and Eddie to support Mask Together America's Protect Firefighters Initiative?
So, for those of us that have been around a long time, like me, we see the old movies of firefighters, and I remember a movie with John Wayne. I wish I could remember it. For those of us on the call that can remember John Wayne, he was a firefighter, and what they would do is they put a handkerchief over their nose. So what we have to try to do is convince the firefighting community that they need to be using a respirator during their activity. Now, folks, I don't know if you can imagine how difficult their work is. What they're doing is atrocious. They're wearing, sometimes they're wearing bunker gear. They're working in incredibly hot environments. They have equipment, a hard hat, they got a backpack, they're carrying a hose, they got a shovel, right? You have to put all of those things together to understand the physical exertion that they're dealing with. Now you've got to put a respirator on to try to protect yourself from the chemical toxins in the air. And these cowboys, and I hate to say it, these cowboys don't want to wear it because their predecessors didn't wear it. Their father didn't wear it, right? So I've got to hope that the younger firefighters coming up will heed the warning and that they will use reusable respirators, a respirator of any kind. Let's just say that, right? Because the challenge that they're dealing with is not just a particle. It's not just a soot and dust from the environment, the ashes, but they have off gases. Stuff that's burning is plastic, it's metal with paint on it, and coatings and so forth. Those are highly toxic products that will kill these people, right? So that's what we have to do. They don't think, the issue is here, folks, is they don't understand that there are comfortable elastomeric respirators in the market. They don't understand that. They understand that there are other products in the market, and I speak of this because they're not comfortable. So the problem that I, as a company, face is when I approach someone to sell them my product, they already have perception in mind, it's rubber, it's uncomfortable. It's not true.
Well, thank you for working so hard to create products that are comfortable and more user-friendly. So for our final question, what do you propose the government should do to encourage workers in high-risk environments to wear elastomeric respirators?
The government, the governing authority over the workplace is OSHA. OSHA states that if there's a hazard to a chemical or so forth that requires the use of a respirator, you must follow the OSHA, and I apologize, folks, I can't remember the numbers. I think it's 1910 respiratory standard. Doesn't matter what you're doing. It's the workplace. It's a hospital. It's a construction site. It's a firefighter. It's a refinery. It doesn't matter. If the application says the exposure levels and the possibility for of a contaminant that could harm a person the employer must conduct a hazardous assessment to determine whether or not they need a respirator. If the hazard assessment determines they need a respirator, they should do a couple of things. Number one, first, try to engineer the hazard out. Can you get rid of the hazard, or could you reduce the airborne contaminant to a level that's below the permissible exposure level? Okay, that's number one. If you can't engineer it out, then you have to implement the appropriate PPE. And in this case, it's respiratory protection. That's the law, right? We have to be careful. What we're seeing here is they're breaking the law, because we know that fighting a wildland fire emits toxins beyond the exposure level, so that you need a respirator. And this is the gray part that we have to be careful of, not to insult anybody, but we have to protect our firefighters.
Agreed. Agreed. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and for being with us tonight. You've taught us so much. I know I've learned a lot. So thank you.
You're welcome. I appreciate your time, folks. I apologize. I'm fighting with a virus myself. I've had a heck of an influenza episode. So I'm going to sign off. If anybody has any questions, please send them over to Julie and Christina, and I'd be happy to respond. I wish everybody a great weekend. Be healthy, be happy, enjoy.
Thank you so much, Claudio. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting the initiative.
Our
Yes,
pleasure.
I feel
Thank you
better.
so much.
Very
Thank you.
generous of you and Eddie.
Thank you. Take care, folks.
Okay.
So now our last speaker is Eddie Fanico. And hi, Eddie.
Hi.
How's everybody doing?
Good. Nice to see you. So
Nice to see
glad
you.
we got your camera sorted out.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. Breakdown. Eddie Fanical is the CEO of Vida, a mask and respirator.
Penichkal, by the way.
Fanichkal, I'm so sorry. Eddie Fanichkal is the CEO of Vida, a mask and respirator retailer. And he is an American entrepreneur with a career spanning multiple industries. He is the co-founder of Lutima USA, a tech company that pivoted to mask manufacturing at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Eddie also co-founded the American Medical Manufacturers Association, where he served as VP. AMMA continues to champion supply chain resilience and spearhead governmental efforts to foster domestic manufacturing and ensure a reliable supply of critical healthcare products. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so first question. Can you tell us about AMMA?
AMA is, we started out as the American Mask Manufacturers Association way back in 2021. We have since pivoted to the American Medical Manufacturers Association to be more inclusive of other PPE manufacturers. We're a trade group of American manufacturers. We set up shop to manufacture masks, respirators, like Claudio and I, and Claudio does Elastomeric. I do like KN95, KF94, and surgical masks. And then there are other people that in our group that do gloves, gowns, all that stuff. Even 3M has recently joined our board for their American plants. So that's pretty much what we do. We're promoting American-made manufacturing and supply chain resilience within America, because we see the need to ensure that all nurses, firefighters, everybody that needs a mask in the United States does not go without a product that is life-saving. So we saw that during the pandemic early on. And, we saw that a lot of entrepreneurs, there were, God, I think 20, 30 of us, smaller companies that set up during the pandemic. And I'm one of the last companies that's still standing that set up during the pandemic. So I'm actually the last company that still does retail. Well, maybe a few others, but there's very few of us. Where the bigger players are obviously Honeywell and 3M and those monstrous companies that manufacture all over the world too. But we are promoting U.S. manufacturing.
So with competition from imports and big companies that have big marketing budgets, how can small businesses stay afloat?
It's really hard. I mean, we survive basically through word of mouth and Google Ads right now. We do a lot of retail. Honestly, there are a lot of big players in the game, and the system is so overweight and overbloated. And bigger companies tend to go with group purchasing organizations that sell directly to hospitals. They sell directly to distributors, and you have to kind of play into that game. But it's almost impossible. These guys are buying from China at like, pennies on the dollar. So they're already buying inferior made products. Some of them might be really good product, but I mean, it's still really cheap because China can subsidize their entire PPE industry. And that gets us into trouble because, if there's another pandemic, if China shuts down, if, other countries are, we have a trade war going on, how are we going to get critical needs to people that need them within our own borders? So this is something that we face every day as a group of U.S. mask manufacturers. But now that we have larger companies like 3M in our board, we are able to, consider how do we get masks to people that need them, and how do we advertise effectively to the American public.
So what are the challenges U.S. mask manufacturers face with PPE not mandated for infection control of even an airborne virus such as SARS-CoV-2, which has killed millions around the world?
That's not mandated?
That's not mandated.
Well, I mean, we don't face that challenge necessarily. It's the public that faces that challenge, right? If it's not mandated, the public's at risk. We're here to manufacture protective gear, protective items for you to use. And obviously, we want everybody to use them. So mandating is a good way to do it. And we have talked to the US government about warm basing and making sure our supply is adequate for when the next need comes. I mean, we're seeing a lot of stuff right now, that's really scary, right? So with the last administration, during the Biden administration, the Office of Pandemic Preparedness and Response, they were the ones warning us about bird flu coming. They were the ones warning us about like infectious diseases that would be critical for us to have supplies for the future. And then now we don't really have much contact with OPPR, but we're going to still attempt to manufacture as best we can with the knowledge that we have.
Okay, so you pivoted your tech company Latima to make masks in 2020, and that was driven by COVID. Many businesses did the same to address the need for PPE in the US instead of relying on importing. So if we face another pandemic, is the US self-sufficient in medical supply today?
That's a hard question to answer, but we are as sufficient as we're going to be now without knowing the actual potential need. We were giving numbers to OPPR, what our current stock levels were, what our maximum capacity were. So, we could face another pandemic, and we would definitely be able to start ramping up, not just my company, but everybody, every one of the mask manufacturers. But we would probably still need other companies to prop up or additional supply to come from somewhere.
What is Vita's mask recycling program about?
Vita is a retail mask seller. So every mask we sell, we want to make sure it doesn't end up in the waste stream. We want to make sure it's recycled. So with every mask we sell, if you're a customer of ours, you can get a free label to return the masks to us, and we'll recycle them. If you're not a customer, you just pay for shipment to recycle.
Great.
So it's just our sustainability program. We want to make sure that we are doing something about mask waste and respirator waste.
Great.
Yeah.
What are you doing to stay competitive in selling masks?
Well, like I said, we compete with a lot of like bigger companies. So we typically just do at the Vita level, we do like fashionable masks. We do like, stuff that has glitter or patterns or, things that are like kind of higher fashion wear, and like variety, I'd say. And we also like make really good masks. So I think that that's a huge benefit. You know, you could buy something from like Walmart, or you can buy something from us. So once people kind of see like, you know, oh, you have really good masks, they tend to stick with us, or come back to us.
I think anyone is seeking an alternative to anything from Walmart right now. So
Yeah.
what do you consider as a breakthrough of your business in mask manufacturing?
A breakthrough. Well, one product that I've been working on for a couple of years is a mask that or a respirator that also is antiviral. So we're actually launching that next week. We've launched it previously, like a test campaign, like in the past few years. But this product is actually a mask that is electrospun nanofiber, and it's coated with, not coated, but like infused with rose bengal, which inactivates virus particles when exposed to light. So it's actually a really good product, and it's very breathable, very thin. Because it's electrostatic nanofiber, it's a lot smaller woven material. So it's actually mechanically filtering like viruses and bacteria and small particles, instead of like relying on like corona charge or whatever charge for regular masks to get to that, like, you know, N95 level. So ours is actually just at the level mechanically.
That is so cool.
Mhm.
And for our final question, this one is my favorite question because it's talking about my favorite thing to use when I travel. Can you talk about the SIP valve? What is your role
Yeah.
in co-founding this tool? It saved me on so many flights.
Well, I'm glad you like it. The SIP valve is actually an invention of a friend of mine and his partner, like Vasant and Derek. So they came to me with a product idea, like, you know, during the pandemic, and said, hey, we got this product that I think would be great to complement masks. And basically I helped them bring the product to market with, you know, like, here's what we should do, here's what it should look like, here's how we get it out to people. We, you know, so the SIP mask, the SIP valve is, you know, a valve that is self-sealing and airtight, so you can drink without, you know, getting any virus or bacteria or whatever you're worried about. That is a really cool thing that we're hoping to continue to iterate. And our original goal was to develop it directly into a mask, and that's still kind of our goal. So that's kind of like a future product that you can use. But the reason we went without masking, without like embedding it into a mask, was Vasant is a huge proponent of the 3M aura. It like fits his face. A lot of people love 3M aura, so I'm not going to say anything wrong, you know, bad about 3M aura. But I also manufacture my own mask, so you know, we want to make sure that it's versatile enough that everybody uses it with what mask they feel comfortable using it with. So that's the reason we built a campaign on, like, hey, this is how you attach it to your own mask, and it'll keep you safe while drinking.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that you know and sharing your time with us.
Thank you for having me. And if anybody wants to try my new antiviral mask, just let me know and I'll send them a sample.
I would love to try it.
Please, yeah.
I would love to try one.
Sorry, yeah, I should have probably mentioned that to Julie early on. I was gonna just give a little gift to everybody who's here today.
Oh,
Oh,
oh my gosh.
yeah.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That's unreal. Wow.
Yeah. So thank you again for having me, and we love the work that you guys are doing, and we're proud to sponsor or co-sponsor the firefighter initiative. Yeah. If anybody has any questions, please let me know. I don't know if we do Q&A or not.
Eddie, I just want to say thank you so much for supporting this idea of donating masks to firefighters. Without
Absolutely.
you helping us to connect us to Dantech, we would never be able to do that. And I hope that the LA County and also the mayor's office will respond to us soon. They have received our pledge, but they actually have not, you know, officially given us the a
Yeah.
response that we can take to the next step. We want to fit test the firefighters or get all the mask order for them. And that's the next step. And we're all looking forward to do the right thing. This is an
Absolutely.
educational initiative. We really want them to open their minds up to like try products that are, you know, protective and also easy for them to work with. And we hope that they will be open mind, like have open mind to trying this out. And we're really grateful to you, basically just like donating to this cause. And thank you so much for being here to explain, you know, how difficult it is to be a mask manufacturer in a country that is, you know, culturally not accepting the usage of PPE.
Yeah, I definitely worry about what's happening in the next 4 years. So, you know, hopefully we have to make a difference. It's up to us. It's not up to the government anymore.
We will continue to advocate for prevention. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Christina, for being our MC. Thank you, Dr. Corthals, for leading us, and all our advisors that have been guiding Mask Together America's teammates to continue to raise awareness.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for sharing their time and knowledge with us and supporting our Firefighters Initiative. As a reminder, we can be found on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, and Blue Sky. We can